David Weaver arrived in Liverpool late at night after a slow train journey from London. He was 18 years old, wearing a new brown suit and feeling excited about his first business assignment. His boss had told him to find his own accommodation and report to the local office once he settled in. At the station, a man directed him to a pub about a kilometre away that might have a room available. As David walked down the dark street carrying his suitcase, he noticed rows of grand old houses that had clearly seen better days. The paint was peeling, and the once beautiful buildings showed signs of neglect. Then something caught his eye. In a downstairs window, lit by a street lamp, he saw a small printed notice that read bed and breakfast. David stopped and peered through the window. Inside, he could see a cozy room with a fire crackling in the fireplace. A small dog slept peacefully on the carpet, and the room was filled with comfortable furniture, including a sofa, piano, and several armchairs. In the corner sat a parrot in a cage. The scene looked warm and inviting, certainly more comfortable than a pub, though David knew a pub would offer companionship and conversation. He stood in the cold, trying to decide. Just as he was about to walk away and check the pub first, something strange happened. His eyes fixed on those words again, bed and breakfast, and he felt compelled to stay. Almost without realizing it, he found himself climbing the front steps and pressing the doorbell. The door opened instantly, as if someone had been waiting behind it. A woman in her 40s stood there with a warm smile. She had black hair and gentle brown eyes, and she invited him inside with such kindness that David found himself stepping through the doorway before he could think twice. When David asked about the price, she quoted £10 per night, including breakfast, which was remarkably cheap, less than half what he had expected to pay. She seemed genuinely delighted to have him as a guest and led him upstairs to a small, beautifully prepared bedroom. Everything was neat and ready, as if she had been expecting him. After he unpacked and washed his hands, David went downstairs to sign the guest book as required by law. The landlady wasn't in the living room, but the fire still burned warmly, and the little dog remained motionless in front of it. David opened the guest book and wrote his name and address. Only 2 other names appeared on the page: George Perkins from Bristol and Billy Arthur from Bath. Something about those names troubled him. They sounded strangely familiar, as if he had heard them somewhere before, perhaps in the newspapers. The entries were old, the most recent from over 3 years ago, and the other from nearly 4 years back. When his landlady returned with tea, David mentioned that the names seemed familiar. She smiled and said they were such wonderful boys, tall and handsome, just like him. As David tried to remember where he had heard those names, a disturbing thought crossed his mind. Wasn't George Perkins the name of a schoolboy who had disappeared during a walking tour? But the landlady corrected him, saying Mr. Perkins was a university student when he stayed with her. She spoke of him with such affection, as if he had just left yesterday. David sat on the sofa drinking his tea, though it tasted slightly bitter. A strange smell hung in the air, something he couldn't quite identify. It reminded him of hospitals or new leather. The landlady watched him carefully over her teacup, then mentioned that Mr. Perkins had loved tea and that both he and Mr. Arthur were still there, living on the third floor. David felt a chill run through him. He looked at the parrot in the cage and suddenly realized it hadn't moved at all since he first saw it through the window. The landlady noticed his gaze and explained almost proudly that the parrot was no longer alive. She had stuffed it herself, and it looked so lifelike that it fooled everyone. Then David's eyes fell on the little dog sleeping by the fire. With growing horror, he reached out and touched it gently. The dog was hard and cold, perfectly preserved but completely dead. The landlady smiled sweetly and said she stuffed all her pets herself when they passed away. It was her special skill. David's hands trembled as he set down his teacup. The bitter taste lingered in his mouth. He thought about those two names in the guest book, about young men who had arrived at this house and never left. The landlady continued smiling at him, her small white hands folded in her lap, watching him with those gentle brown eyes. She asked if he had signed the book, and when he confirmed he had, she nodded with satisfaction. She explained that she looked at it every day to remember the names of Mr. Perkins and Mr. Arthur. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, that in the last 3 or 4 years there had been no other guests at all. Only those two young men, and now David. The fire crackled softly in the silence. The stuffed dog remained motionless on the carpet. The dead parrot stared with glass eyes from its cage, and David sat frozen on the sofa, finally understanding that he had walked into a house from which no guest ever departed, where a lonely woman collected beautiful young men the same way she collected and preserved her beloved pets, keeping them forever on the third floor. Trapped in this strange house where time had stopped and guests checked in but never ever checked out.